could reverse the decline of pelagic organisms and other estuarine-dependent species, including anadromous salmonids. We believe that it is critical to initiate this process now, recognizing that it will take time to complete, as will the BDCP planning and permitting process. The department looks forward to assisting you with any technical support we can provide during this process. And should you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cantrell. Mr. Herrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. John Herrick for the South Delta Water Agency and the Central Delta Water Agency. My first comments deal with the board's review of the salinity standards in the South Delta. We had a discussion about this, I don't know, 4 years ago. I would suggest that before we move forward and adopt anything, any changes to the water quality control plan, that the participants be given a chance to cross-examine the experts upon whose opinions the conclusions are based. I'll note just in passing that the peer review of the flows and the salinity standard changes included only one reviewer of the salinity issues, and in my view, he did not address the issues that we raised. Just from a greedy, self-serving position, I would hope that if the political powers to be decide to delay the flow standards, that we don't all fall over ourselves rushing to change the salinity standards, but both those processes be put off. With regard to the rest of the issues dealing with flows, I would like to encourage the board to not think that someone else is going to address or solve any of these problems. We've seen how the processes have worked before, and I'm not a fishery advocate, but fisheries reached record lows. So you're going to have to buck up and make the hard decisions and assign obligations to people in order to do what you think will protect the fisheries. I'll note that the Department of Fish and Game has never issued a take permit under California Endangered Species to the DWR. DWR has never applied for one of those. They're hoping that the BDCP process will take care of that. But that means we've had, what, 25 years, 20 years of operations of the State Water Project without take permit authorization. Water Code Section 11912 requires that all costs associated with the protection of fisheries be charged to the State Water Project's contractors, and that only enhancement can be a general fund obligation. Now, layered upon top of that is the California Endangered Species Act, which requires enhancement in order to get a take permit. These are very general statements. So we know that the BDCP process is an attempt to build an alternate conveyance facility and then have the public pay for the billions of dollars of habitat restoration, species recovery. I don't think that's legal, either for them or for you to approve that, until somebody assigns those appropriate costs to the department for the protection of fisheries. When we go to get a permit to do some levee work and you have to remove an elderberry bush, the Department of Fish and Game doesn't say, well, you know, lots of things have contributed and other people do stuff, so you just replace the elderberry bush and other people will be doing other things. But for the BDCP process, the department goes to the Department of Fish and Game and they say, well, you know, a lot of things have caused a problem, so you build your canal and we'll get state funds to do the mitigation of the prior impacts to fish, not of the facility itself. I'll note that D 1485 kind of presaged all this. That's a long time ago, but 1485 said in order for the projects to fully mitigate their impacts to fisheries, it would require a virtual shutting down. So that gives you a starting point as to the main causes of the fisheries decline. And importantly, the very next page of D 1485 states that the Sassoon, in order to protect Sassoon Marsh, would require another 2 million acre feet of outflow. And I think the studies indicate or support the notion that the projects are not simply a cause of the fishery decline because of their change in the hydrodynamics and the take of fish, but also because we've removed a huge chunk of delta outflow. Now, of course, in order to provide millions of acre-feet of delta outflow, someone has less water. But we already know that, right? After 2 years of drought in 2007 and 2008, the projects approached you and said, please relieve us from our outflow obligation because it's an emergency. They didn't have enough water to provide the #1 export contractor, the exchange contractor. At that time, they didn't think they did. And they asked to be relieved from the delta outflow standard, which is the minimum flow for fisheries in the 3rd year of a drought. Instead of having 11,400 CFS, we had 7,000 CFS. So the problem that should be being addressed by everybody behind me is that after 2 years of drought, the system didn't have any water. Now, there was water in reservoirs, but as it turned out, that was insufficient for future years' minimum flows, was insufficient for later in the year cold water flows, and certainly was insufficient for outflow. Now, I would assume that the contractors would be screaming that whoever's operating the system operate it so that they were going to have no water in the 3rd year of a drought, not the 5th or something, the 3rd year of a drought. That's the problem facing us. And so you're going to have to allocate the amount of water that's available and admonish people that they have to do actions so that in future years there's enough for some minimum uses, not for everyone. With that, I'll leave it to you. I wish you luck, but there is no answer, and there's not supposed to be a sharing of the burden. It's supposed to be people mitigating their damages and an allocation of water according to water rights priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mark Bradley.
Good morning, Chair Hoppen, board members. My name is Mark Bradley. I'm a senior engineer with the Delta Stewardship Council.
What are you doing there?
Did you have a twin named Mark Bradley that used to work here?
Isn't
I
there a
did. I don't know what
one-year
happened.
prohibition?
As you know,
Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you. Less went over the background of the Delta Stewardship Council. It was created in 2010, charged with the development of a plan that will achieve the co-equal goals of protecting a more reliable water supply for California and protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Delta ecosystem, all the while protecting and enhancing the Delta as an evolving place. In moving ahead with an update to the Bay Delta Plan, the State Water Board has received comments recommending that they delay further work on updates to this plan. Director Howard's January 25th response cited the draft of the Delta Stewardship Council's plan and clarified that he could not support the request for a delay. The Delta Stewardship Council's draft plan includes direction to the State Water Board to adopt and implement flow objectives for the Delta by June 2014, as well as other date-specific recommendations. This recommendation, this policy statement in there, was important enough that it's reiterated 3 times, as was mentioned earlier. We're aware that these dates are aggressive, but our discussions with Water Board staff indicate that they are reasonable and feasible. As Director Howard noted in his letter, revisions to the plan must be done in parallel with the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. The Sacramento Bee article yesterday noted the current proposal, may not be completed until 2025. Clearly, the Water Board cannot delay development and implementation of flow objectives, and this must be done in parallel. Now, Chair Hoppen asked some really good and insightful questions that don't have clean answers. How can there be progress with so many disparate interests? And how can we move ahead without clear funding certainty? And we don't know the answers to those. And this is exactly why you cannot delay this process, and this is exactly why Mr. Grosvenor has said that any solution will need to be an adaptive solution. So we urge the Water Board to move ahead with its current proposal to update the Bay Delta Plan as proposed and to not delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Jackson.
Michael Jackson, appearing on behalf of the California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance and the California Water Impact Network. Actually, I'll let Mr. Jennings speak for CSPA, and I'll just speak for CWIN. I find myself in almost agreement with Mr. McLaughlin, which lets you know how much trouble we're in. He's right. His plan B is right. His plan B is, let's get the hearings started. Let's not waste time with workshops. Everybody in the other processes is waiting on you, because if you look in the code sections, you're the boss, and we need to know how you're going to deal with the evidence. If you're going to deal with the evidence, you need the benefit of hearing from everybody in an adversarial situation so that you can make a decision that will inform the rest of these processes. The idea that you would be waiting on something, for instance, based on the Delta Stewardship Council's plan or the Delta Stewardship Council's environmental document, will simply waste about a year, and then you'll have to wait for the 3 or 4 years while that mess gets cleaned up. It is the worst document in terms of an environmental document that I've ever seen at any level of government. And the reason is because they didn't make any decisions. They gave policy advice to you, essentially, to get off the dime. And in reading the document and doing the 70-page response to it, what I found basically appalling is that there is, without the state board, no ability for anyone to know what you ought to do with things like, you have a Delta plan. There's no water quality in the plan. There's no water rights in the plan. There's no flows in the plan. There's no plan in the plan. So where we are, and I know that's true because Aqua says so.
Aqua's laughing too.
Yes. Well, I mean, they do good work when it's in the right direction. The idea here is that I've been waiting for the hearings to deal with the water flows since about 1982. The evidence, as you saw in your informational response to what the legislature asked you to do, has been consistent since 1982. There is very little different now. Whether or not that information is sufficient for your work is up to you, not to someone else. And so the best thing you can do is to simply become Judge Wanger, who left screaming after years of trying to deal with this stuff, because the water code says you are Judge Wanger, at least in the first instance. So I would like to indicate to you that most of the people who have the historical memory and most of the people who have the evidence are getting old and beginning to die while we're waiting for the hearing. Now, I'm 65. You can probably get rid of me by following VAMP 2 or VAMP 3 or somebody else getting together in a room somewhere and doing the board's job. But you're the brightest of the board members that I've known since 1982. You're probably even the least dominated by previous interests of anybody since 1982. And you have the best set of knowledge of anybody since 1982. So please, since we're talking about a tunnel that was described in the newspaper yesterday as taken in the best of cases, to 2025 to build, there won't be anything left in the Delta if you don't go forward in the meantime. Thank you.
Mr. Jennings? Or Jackson, excuse me.
All short
the
little.
gray, the gray threw
Right.
me off there a little bit
Absolutely.
in the dialogue. So you're saying that there's been several $100 million that have been squandered, and that you have hopes that our agency on a canned bean and white bread budget will solve this problem without using any of their information. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that $200 million has been completely squandered. I think there is confirmation and validation of everything we've known since 1982. It didn't change any. We need 1 million acre feet of flow if we're going to build a canal coming out of the San Joaquin side, because we got to keep the water moving toward the Golden Gate. If we're going to build a tunnel, we need to figure out what kind of flow we're going to need past the intake, because we're going to have a sewer system instead of an estuary. So it seems to me that all of that information is useful. Will somebody please use it instead of waiting for some mythical federal solution like the one of Devin Nunes, which is to declare that the federal government, uber alles, rules everything because they've got a water right. And you folks have got to stop getting in the way.
Thank you, Michael. I asked for that, I guess, didn't I? Bill, you want to come in as the closer on that argument there for us?
I wouldn't dare. Chair Hoppin, board members, Bill Jennings, California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance. Actually, Michael could have spoken for me. I too.
You don't have to repeat it then.
No, but I too share Timmy's proposal. Let's schedule a hearing and get on to it, because that's right. I'm getting old. I mean, back in the '80s when I started this process, I had red hair and a red beard. And we've gone through the processes. I mean, the '88 water quality, control, the '92 hearings, the '95 hearings, all up through, D1641. I mean, the 2006 Bay Delta. I mean, we go on and on and on, and we see these gorgeous schematics and flow charts, and things keep getting worse. And we've essentially known enough science in this estuary as to what needs to be done. We can pile studies on top of studies. It's not going to improve our understanding of what needs to be done. I mean, on the San Joaquin side, you've got 25 million acre feet of diversion, irrigation and Ilmenite diversion rights for a watershed that has about 6 million acre feet of average flow. And so anything you do that addresses fishery needs, the increased fishery needs on the San Joaquin, is going to gore someone, and everyone is going to want to delay, to go into a stakeholder process, which we would stringently oppose and suggest that the state board could not participate in that because of ex parte considerations. We do support the schedule that has been outlaid. We support Tom Howard's understanding that he conveyed to Brother Merrill, and I think that we just need to get on with it. If we're going to wait around for BDCP, we might as well wait around for the Beatles to come together again. I mean, there's a lot of problems that BDCP is facing. VAMP's a failure, and so anyway, I would just suggest that let's move on with it, because if we can't, as executive director of an organization that holds some very ancient riparian water rights at Collinsville, I think we would be tempted to pull the plug and start a full adjudication of the basin. I think we're overdue on that. Certainly our former governor Warren in 1953 voiced the need that should have occurred before the operation of the Central Valley Project, a decade before the state project was approved. And maybe if we're going to just go around in circles on proceedings and meetings, we should at least do something valuable, and I think that could be accomplished in an adjudication proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Steve Sorey.
Hi.
You as
Good morning.
bodyguard, David?
I'm masquerading as Steve this morning.
Oh.
Good morning. I'm Steve Sorey, manager of energy trading contracts for Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Accompanying me this morning is David Elajan with the law firm of Downey Brand. As you may know, SMUD is the second largest customer-owned electric utility in the state, serving 1.1 million customers in the Sacramento region. SMUD is joined in a letter to the board submitted by the Northern California Water Agency and the Glen-Colusa Irrigation District, recommending a proposed workshop schedule and approach for the water quality control plan update. We believe that transparency is of the utmost importance in this process. SMUD is very concerned about the impacts of the proposed 2010 Delta flow criteria on the hydro generation for the Central Valley project, namely the Shasta, Trinity, and Folsom reservoirs. Clean hydro generation is a critical resource for SMUD and California, particularly during the hot summers months when customers' demand for energy peaks. Hydropower can meet up to 45% of Northern California's peak load. SMUD is the single largest purchaser of power out of the CVP, purchasing 31% of the clean hydro. We count on hydro generation from the CVP as well as our own Upper American River project to help meet summer loads and other system requirements. Establishing the flow requirements as proposed by the 2010 Delta flow criteria would greatly increase winter and spring river flows on the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, but would also leave reservoirs severely depleted and too often near empty, significantly reducing hydro energy during this critical summer months. We believe it is imperative for the board to hold workshops or hearings to thoroughly assess the impacts of the proposed flow requirements. Specifically, SMUD requests that the board schedule at least one informational workshop to discuss the potential ramifications on hydropower generation in California. Thank you.
Chair Hoppin, if I might add on to Mr. Story's comments. There's been a lot of conversation this morning already about adaptive management.
Identify yourself.
Sorry. David Elajan, Downey Brand, here for SMUD this morning. Chair Hoppin, there's been a lot of discussion already this morning about the need for adaptive management, for flexibility, for I believe what Vice Chair Spivey-Weber called agileness or being nimble. And what SMUD is really looking for here is the ability to thoroughly explore in a workshop format where we can actually have dialogue about the different ways in which hydropower is generated and used and the various impacts not only on hydro as a beneficial use but other beneficial uses. That sort of clarification of discussion, as Mr. Grover said earlier, the sort of adaptive management in real time really is going to be essential information for the board as you go forward trying to develop or trying to meet the very aggressive schedule that you've set forward. And so we really think that this is not any sort of effort at delay or trying to sidetrack the process, but actually getting to a more effective process that will get the board to its goal, and the goal that we all share about restoring the Delta, having reliable water supply more quickly. And so it's in that spirit that we offer this suggestion. Thank you very much for your time.
David, I appreciate that explanation and a specific request on a workshop topic. Fran?
There was a lot of conversation among the hydropower folks. We got lots of letters and lots of, but it was very sad to me because it was really focusing on what won't happen. And so I do appreciate that your request is more more manageable and actually more useful. But I wanted to ask Les, what have we done to date to learn this information? I mean, have we been talking with with SMUD and with other hydropower people? Have we been engaged?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, we've met with CalISO, and we're actually been talking to staff, trying to set up a meeting with SMUD, and also that would be with TID as well. But even just to jump back just a little bit, because reference was made to the Delta Flow Criteria Report, as you recall, that didn't consider any of the balancing. To provide an example of what we're doing when we're doing that balancing now as part of our water quality control planning, for the San Joaquin River, we're looking at 20, 40, and 60% of unimpaired flow and developing the tools to determine what would be the water supply effects, the hydroelectric generation effects, the economic effects of doing that. So it provides more useful information. It's not just looking at one high-end number, but it's really the range, because that will inform the decision-making. So we're very mindful of doing that for the full range, because providing the information just for that upper limit doesn't really provide any useful information.
And when will SMUD and others be able to see what
We're releasing one of the report. This is just for the San Joaquin River now. Our timeline is to release those 3 reports this Friday. That's the revised technical appendix, the economic analysis, and the grid effects. So that's part of the public process. We're looking to have then to get feedback on what we've done wrong or how that could be improved as well. And we're also, for the economics, not directly the question, but we're also going to pursue having a peer review of the economic analysis as well.
Les, as we go forward, and I don't know if we're going to be able to accomplish what I'm going to suggest. We don't know what other specific requests are going to come forward on workshops, in addition to that Mr. Elijah and Mr. Sori just presented to us. But I would think in a best case scenario, you as staff are privy to the conversations you're having with CalISO and with SMUD and with others. Ultimately, the 3 of us, unless we have new members, but then 5 of us are going to ultimately have to make these decisions. So, if there's a way of going forward where we could actually have someone possibly facilitate, specific workshops that might be combined into a one-day event or multiple day events over a period of time that are concurrent, and that's the portion that I'm not sure that you can accomplish, that are concurrent with the activities that you've got going on. I see a situation where staff certainly gets the first cut at this as you're going through the information and putting material together for your recommendations to us, but then to have it all laid out in a document and not have the opportunity to have a discussion is somewhat limiting. I mean, I will agree with some that have spoken to this, the workshop idea, and if they're not done correctly, they are just a time delay kind of situation, and while they're informative, there's been another agenda accomplished as well. So, after this workshop, if we could get together and talk and see what else comes forward as specific requests and see if something can be done concurrently without really delaying the process that you've got going on, but to keep us as board members, more informed, I think it's certainly worthy of a discussion. So.
Very good.
Chair Hoppen, Mr. Sori can kick me if he disagrees, but I think SMUD would be delighted to help your staff work on those sorts of processes for a hydropower workshop. One clarification, Mr. Grover mentioned that staff had invited SMUD to participate in a discussion, and we were quite delighted, but we were a little mystified as well because we don't have any facilities on the San Joaquin River. And so we were wondering how we could be of help there. But this sort of effort would be very, very useful, and we'd be glad to participate.
Well, you had a golden opportunity to throw the responsibility on somebody else, and you squandered it, it looks like to me.
Chair Hoppen, you know that's not SMUD's way.
I see.
We're very responsible.
But there was this very strong letter signed by hundreds of people, I mean lots, not hundreds, about what's going on. So I think that was the reasons you were invited to come to have a conversation, so that we could learn from you and you could learn from us.
And that's a great tribute to SMUD, and thank you, Vice Chair Spivey-Weber. But again, because we don't have the detailed type of analysis and experience on the San Joaquin, we didn't feel that we had the expertise that we could contribute on that river system. If we're talking about the Upper American, we have that expertise.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Les, did you want to respond to
Well,
that?
just, we of course recognize no specific, no facilities, but part of the analysis that we're looking at, and this is part of our outreach just to get, people who understand the various systems, but the various balancing authorities in the state, that we're looking at not just the project-specific effects, but what are the effects on the grid as a whole and the balancing. So reaching out, more rather than less to develop that information with those that might have some expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brent, 10 pause. Good morning.
Mr. Chair and board members, my name is Brent Tempass. I'm with the Northern California Power Agency. We have 16 publicly owned utilities that stretch from the South Bay as far north as Redding. We have hydropower facilities on the North Fork of the Stanislaus, as well as our members purchase power from the Central Valley Project as marketed by Western. We want to echo the sentiments expressed by SMUD, and that we would very much welcome a workshop to examine what the impacts would be on hydropower, as we do have concerns as to what any new delta flow criteria would impose, and we would also make ourselves available as a resource as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We're going to take a break until 1:45 on this clock. If Eric, representing the Tuolumne River Trust, would be so kind to provide a last name to us. I know we've heard of you, but we don't know what your last name is. And we will resume with you when we come back from our break. So we'll see you at 1:45. Thanks.
Although he didn't seem to recognize me earlier.
I'm not running you off, Linda, but I'm going to get them gathered up. No, 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 you go ahead. Quarter to 11. That's how you get confused about them draining the lake. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd take your seats, please. Janine, is my microphone turned on, or are they ignoring me? If you don't all sit down right now, I'm going to drain Northern California tomorrow. That work? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now, Janine, I'm really confused. I told Les, or Eric, from the Tuolumne River Trust that he hadn't put his name, and now you say his name is Wes. Would the gentleman from the Tuolumne River Trust come forward and identify yourself, if for no other reason than my curiosity?
Maybe I can clear up some of the confusion. My name is Eric Wesselman. I'm the executive director of the Tuolumne River Trust.
Pardon me, I'm not laughing at you at all. You may have taken a little to that, Janine. You have big shoulders.
Good afternoon, or good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Thank you. Well, so I'm here today with a letter in hand that's signed by my organization as well as by American Rivers, California Trout, the Merced River Council, Conservation Council, Trout Unlimited, and the Nature Conservancy. And the main message of this letter is that we support the State Water Board's current schedule for the adoption of revised flow objectives for the Bay Delta Plan. It's certainly been some time now. We've been, as you know, in this process for a few years, and the plan is now overdue. And in the meantime, the Delta, the estuary that we all depend on, has been in a perpetual state of decline, and things are certainly not getting any better. And the stakeholders have had really abundant opportunities to participate over those years, and there will be more opportunities to participate in the months ahead through the rest of the year, when we hope that the board will adopt revised flow objectives for the San Joaquin River in particular. So outside of this proceeding, the Tuolumne River Trust has been pleased to participate in these conversations, or this first meeting in Modesto, to talk about the flow objectives. But from our perspective, this meeting and these kind of initial negotiations are not about setting the objectives. They're about how we meet the objectives, how we can implement and get there in the best possible way. So in other words, for us, we've changed the focus, or we're changing the focus to the implementation program and to the allocation of responsibility among the tributaries in particular. So I look forward and hope to have the state board's continued leadership in that direction. So thank you for the time and consideration. I brought copies of the letter as well, signed on with those 5 organizations that I'll hand over to the clerk.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Rhonda Reed.
person who was taller than me.
That's why we have a flex microphone,
I
Rhonda.
appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Rhonda Reed. I'm the acting San Joaquin River Basin branch chief for the National Marine Fisheries Service here in Sacramento. I want to start off by commending the board and the staff for the significant amount of work that has been done to this point in terms of I've been most involved, you've seen me here before, in the San Joaquin River proceedings with respect to flow and salinity, and I understand the process today is looking at the larger scale in terms of how the Delta plan and the Basin Plan Amendment for the Delta fits in. We would like to support that the board continue with the proposed schedule and articulation of the processes with the San Joaquin and the Basin Plan, as articulated with some other key things going on in the Bay Delta system, in particular the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. I appreciate that there was a very goodwill effort that took place a couple of weeks ago in Modesto to look at a settlement process on the tributaries, but that is very much in its infancy. And I understand Mr. O'Loughlin's comments about needing to focus on processes and which is the most appropriate. But nonetheless, you have a significant amount of work going on already with respect to moving forward with the San Joaquin issues as well as the Bay Delta issues that we encourage you to continue on that schedule. As you know, the National Marine Fisheries Service is particularly concerned with anadromous species in the Bay Delta system. So those are Chinook salmon, both the listed and unlisted runs of that species, Central Valley steelhead and sturgeon. I couldn't help but notice that our biological opinion was listed as one of the ongoing activities that needs to be coordinated with or understood what's going on when you are moving forward with your decision processes. And so I wanted to make sure that you understood that the standard for evaluating a federal action with respect to its effect on a listed species, our job is to evaluate the proposed action and the potential effects of that proposed action on listed species. And if our analysis would determine that that action as proposed would lead to jeopardize the continued existence of the species, it is our job to recommend a reasonable and prudent alternative to the action agency to implement so they can go forward with implementing the action, but in such a way that it does not jeopardize the continued existence of the species. And that is the condition that we have with the long-term operations of the Central Valley Project and State Water Project. That's the biological opinion you were referring to. So the actions that are included in that biological opinion, you could look at them as staying the course, preventing the species from slipping over the edge into extinction, which is the purpose of the Endangered Species Act. But it doesn't contribute, those actions don't contribute to recovery. And your processes look at the water quality of the Bay Delta system on a much larger scale, in a different perspective, bring issues to bear that were not analyzed in the analysis of the specific action of delivering water through the state and federal water projects. So we look at the state board process as being complementary with your public trust responsibilities and your balancing responsibilities, that there is an opportunity here to further activities, not just for listed species, but for non-listed species, so that we can maintain not only the potential for recovery of our listed species, but to maintain a sustainable commercial and recreational harvest of the species. So we are not a large office, but we have a great interest in these processes, and we are willing to offer whatever technical assistance we can to help move this process forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Mr. Rubin, you've got 5 people that you have a specific speaking order in. Do you want to come forward, or do you want them just to come up in this order?
The intent is for me to make some initial remarks and the others to follow with possible additional remarks. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is John Rubin. I am representing the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority, but also speaking on behalf of the state water contractors this morning. The San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority and state water contractors prepared and provided to the board this morning a letter. There were additional copies of the letter at the back of the room for stakeholders. Understand that the letter has been submitted late. I do hope that you review the letter and it influences your consideration of the issue before you today. Let me begin by focusing the purpose of our comments, and it is on the schedule that the staff presented that the board may be following. But at this point, we're not here to criticize the schedule. We're here to talk about additional information that we believe is important for your process. The state water contractors and the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority recognize that the state board will need to proceed with what we're characterizing as the second phase of the update to the water quality control plan, looking at factors, objectives other than South Delta Salinity San Joaquin River flow. However, in doing that, a forum is needed, a new forum is needed in which information can be presented and debated. I was encouraged to hear from Mr. Grober that information is continuing to be developed and analyzed by staff. And while that's encouraging, it doesn't address the need that the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority state water contractors believe is appropriate for the process. That there does need to be a process that's open, allows for public participation, debate, not only to help develop the information specifically, but to allow for the board members to hear and members of the public to hear that information and debate. The forum, we believe, should address 4 areas. First is new science. The process that the state board staff has followed, that you've called for, looks at science basically from that existed as of 2008, 2009, when the decision was made on your periodic review. Understand that the staff may be looking at something more, but there hasn't been a very strong public process to allow for new science to be presented and debated in a public forum. A second is a need for science that's focused on the stressors. Obviously, there's correlations that have been identified, relied upon by your staff in the past that deal with flow and abundance. While those may be helpful to be discussed and debated, it's critical that information is presented on stressors that may give rise to the correlation. The third factor, and you've heard a little bit about this today, is balancing. As I think the board members are well aware, staff's well aware, past efforts like your flow criteria report did not dive into the balancing that's required when you're setting water quality objectives. A new forum that would allow for information to be presented, for the board to hear that information, for the stakeholders to hear it, and for all to debate the information on all of the factors that need to be considered in your balancing, we believe is critical. And then the fourth is coordination. We've heard again a lot about this today. We think that a new forum where you can be updated, where the public can be updated on multiple efforts that are ongoing, as Mr. Grober has outlined to you earlier today, there are many, and I think that a public forum would be beneficial to the process as a whole. The state water contractors, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, do believe that the State Water Board can provide this forum, and that we request that the State Board use the next 6 months from about now until mid-November or early December to conduct a series of initial workshops on specific topics. Again, you've heard some of them today and reflected in my comments. Workshops on science, issues like X2, life cycle modeling, pollution, effective pollution, and other stressors on beneficial uses. We do also believe that there could be workshops on narrative or salmon doubling requirements, and then impacts, kind of the factors that you'll need to consider when setting objectives, the balancing that's required. And then lastly, that these workshops could be a forum to allow the updating on other processes that are ongoing within the Delta or that could affect the Delta. The thought that the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority state water contractors have is after this initial set of 5 or 7 workshops, that the board will be able to look at the information that was presented and evaluate the schedule. It's essentially the adaptive management that Ms. Spivey-Weber referred to earlier or was questioning about. You go through the 5 to 7 workshops, then evaluate whether the current schedule is appropriate or whether changes should be made. The state water contractors in the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority request that the State Board direct its staff to work with stakeholders to develop a detailed plan consistent with the approach that I've outlined, which can be presented to you at your next board meeting in March. And then let me just close by indicating that you will hear from a large group of stakeholders that support this request. There's an attachment to the letter that the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority State Water Contractors provided to you this morning. It's attachment 2. It's the same attachment that the NACWA and GCID letter includes in its submittal, and that the attachment reflects the workshop process that I've outlined. And again, it's been supported by a number of water users' power interests. So with that, I have no further comments. I'm available to answer questions.
Exactly how is science as a workshop topic different from X2, different from life cycle, different, I mean,
Yeah,
are you talking about like a whole workshop just on X2?
I'm sorry if I weren't clear. There is a need to provide, that we believe, a forum to address new science, kind of what science existed when you made your initial decision on your periodic review in 2008 or 9, I believe it was. And that should include issues like Fall X2, the importance of life cycle modeling. I think you're asking an important question. It's part of the reason why we're asking for your staff to work with stakeholders to develop those workshops. Again, we foresee about 5 or 7 workshops over the next period of time through November, December. And the topics for those, we believe, should include issues like Fall X2, the existence of life cycle modeling and how they may influence your decisions. But those are details that we would need to work out given the time frame, the availability of staff and the board.
John, I'll ask you the same question I asked David Elijah. I mean, you envision workshops that are concurrent with the ongoing schedules that you've got? I mean, is one exclusive of the other, do you think, or do you envision this being able to go on concurrently?
Initially, we believe that it could go on concurrently, but I do see this as an iterative process and a kind of an adaptive process, as I think Mr. Grober acknowledged, and you will have to gauge at what point the current schedule works or doesn't work based upon the information that's presented at the workshops. Obviously, the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, and I'll speak just on behalf of the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority at this point, is concerned about the information that's before you and how it may affect other processes. And the reality is having this open forum and this dialogue will allow for us to better understand and may raise some concerns that will cause us to recommend a change in the current schedule. But that's not what we're asking for today.
Well, I would hope it would go without saying that I'm a big advocate of public forums and the more information before the board, but I am also mindful of a schedule, so we need to talk amongst ourselves and staff and see how we can best accomplish some of the requests that are out there without derailing, you know, a schedule that we have before us. And whether we're able to do that or not, I don't know, but I would certainly hope to be able to do that. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
Roger?
Good morning. Roger Patterson, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Just a couple things to emphasize. I do think now is probably the right time to start this phase of the process. And I think two things are important to success. One is to make sure that you have a process to examine and really scrutinize new information, new science. There's been a lot done in the last several years, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. Secondly, I would encourage you to, in a similar public forum, to have information presented that's going on in the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, because I think that will be helpful. And if you do not have a copy of the schedule that was agreed to by Secretary Laird and the federal agencies, I would look at that and see how it syncs up with the schedule that the board is considering. I actually think it works pretty good. I've taken a look at it in the last week or so. And I would, as I say, have someone on behalf of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, whether it's Jerry Merrill or somebody else, come in and present the key pieces that are being developed. Because that is a package that is being crafted that is a combination of measures that include flow, conveyance, facilities, habitat restoration, other stressors kinds of things, that if it can be successful in getting permitted, then it will have been judged by the federal fishery agencies and Department of Fish and Game to be a plan that would contribute to recovery of some 60 species that are in the Delta. So I think it's a good framework to work from. There is a timeline that was agreed to last summer, and that calls for next week actually having the first administrative draft of the entire conservation plan and the environmental documents, both state and federal drafts. The first package will be rolled out next week, and that will be posted. And then ongoing towards a public draft this summer sometime. So I think the timing of that lines up pretty good. A couple other things that I would mention is on the funding, and Chair Hoppen, you mentioned this earlier, and with I think some skepticism, I would say, the conservation plan has to include some
Sometimes reality and skepticism kind of get mulled together and they look like the same
thing. One of the things you'll want to look at probably is the funding plan, the financing plan for the conservation plan. My experience, and I worked on the Platte River program in the Colorado and the Missouri, is the hard part is getting a plan that you can get signed off on. The easy part is getting it funded after that. And our problem is we've never really had a solid plan here. So that's part of what's set up, and a requirement from us will be to fully mitigate not just construction of new facilities, but to mitigate for the project activities. So take a look at that. And
Roger, I wouldn't put you on the spot to expect an answer for what I'm going to ask you, but you know, getting back to the funding, something that I think should be important to everybody in the room, whether they're interested in exporting water, whether they're interested in restoring the Delta, it doesn't matter who it is how we leverage this process in such a way that state and federal funds are part of what we're doing. We need to make sure that, as you say, that plan is crystal clear, but it wouldn't bother me at all to have leverage points along the way that, you know, if one agency or another that is going to have fiscal responsibility before all of this comes to fruition is sitting there sending guys out in cowboy hats and, you know, having that was just, there's a lot of people that wear cowboy hats, Roger, it wasn't anybody specific. So that we just don't get to the end of this and say, where's the beef? You know, and that, as you know, troubles me, and I don't want to wait until all the stakeholders have done what's going to be expected of them in some process and then be looking over their shoulder for state and federal help. I think we need to come up with a plan, and you folks certainly have worked on plans of enormous magnitude that involve enormous amounts of dollars, and how we leverage this process going forward to accomplish the goals that I think we all agree with, and yet have continuity along those lines. You know, at a later date, I would certainly be interested in hearing a collective, you know, proposal as to how we do that, because I think it's something that we'd be very naive if we just assumed that they were going to step in.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think you have to be realistic when you put a plan like this together. So take a look at the draft. The reliance on the federal government, for instance, for funding, I don't think we can assume that they're going to be ramping up funding from where they've been in the past. The reality is the way it's shaping up, over the long term, the kind of funding that the federal government's put into this watershed, into the Delta, without a plan is in the neighborhood of, I think, what would be expected. So I think that that's the key. You got to be reasonable, you got to have expectations, and you got to have, you know, a timeline for how you bring this stuff online. So I agree.
Thank you. David Guy.
Thank you, members of the State Water Board. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thank you for scheduling this informational item. I think the discourse has been good. If I could, on behalf of Northern California Water Association, we did submit a letter to you on Friday. Also, in the audience today, we have a variety of counsel that are available for questions if they arise. That includes Ryan Becerra, David Stephenson, David Elajim, and Aaron Ferguson. A couple of things, if I could, I'd just like to emphasize or kind of put a finer point on the comments that Mr. Rubin and Mr. Patterson have made. We all did work together on the February 14 kind of outline that is before you. And again, that was really a collective effort. It was folks that have a different vantage on the Bay Delta, obviously, but we all sat together and said, how do we make this process work? How do we make this work for the new administration?